Hello, welcome to lecture 21 of CSE 4635. In this lecture, we will be basically continuing our discussion on enterprise Java beans, and we will be taking a look at the life cycle of different kinds of enterprise Java beans, as well as how we can access EJBs as clients. And towards the end of the lecture, we will see some implementation details related to enterprise Java beans. So let's begin. Okay. So continuing from where we left off in our last lecture, we will be discussing about the lifecycle of different kinds of enterprise Java beans. Now, in case of enterprise Java beans, we know that we have session beans and we have Java messaging service beans, right? So as I have mentioned earlier, we will only be focusing on session beans for our discussion. So we will be looking at the lifecycle of the session beans. So again, under session beans, we have three different types of session beans, right? We have stateful session beans, we have stateful session beans, and we have singleton session beans. So each of these session beans lifecycle differs from each other slightly. So we will be taking a look at each of them in detail. But first, there are some annotations and there are some methods that are related to these lifecycles that we need to be aware of. So let's take a look at these lifecycle callback methods at first. So here you can see that we have four annotations: post construct, pre-destroy, post activate, and pre-passivate. So let's try and understand what is the purpose of each of these annotations and methods. So inside our session beans, be it stateless or stateful or singleton, it doesn't really matter. Inside our session beans, any method that has the post construct annotation will be executed or will be invoked right after that session bin has been created by the container. Okay, so basically after all dependency injection has been completed and before the execution of the first business method. Okay, so at first the container will create that session bin, and right before that session bin is ready for service, any method that has been annotated with @postConstruct annotation will be executed, and then that business bin, that is that session bin, is going to be ready for service. Next, we have the @pre-destroy annotation. So as the name suggests, this annotation is used for methods which needs to be invoked right before the destruction of a session bin. So this annotation is related to another special annotation known as the @remove. So the @remove annotation is basically related to another to a method called remove, and this method is used to perform any kind of cleanup operation that the client wants to perform or the developer wants to perform right before ending the lifecycle of a session bin. So suppose you are using a stateful session bin called shopping cart, and suppose right before the client ends his connection with that shopping cart bin, he wants to remove the content of that shopping cart. So for example, he wants to remove the items that he has added to that shopping cart. So under this remove method, what the developer can write is shopping cart is equal to null. And that will basically mean that right before the session bin has been destroyed, the content of that shopping cart has also been nullified. Okay. So anyway, if you have any method annotated with the @pre-destroy method, @pre-destroy annotation, then what will happen is at first the method annotated with @remove will be executed, and then the method annotated with pre-destroy will be executed, and then finally the session bin is going to be ready for garbage collection. Okay, next we have post activate and pre-passivate. These two annotations are related to stateful session bins, because in case of stateful session bins, we have a state or we have a stage called passive. Okay, so basically what happens is if you have established a connection between a client and a session bin, so sometimes what will happen is the client may stop using that session bin for a while, right? So we call that stage of the session bin the passive stage. Okay, so during basically what happens in that passive stage is the container moves that session bin from the primary storage to the secondary storage in its passive stage. Okay, so we will be looking at that in our next slide. But basically before moving the session bin to its passive stage, the container will call the method annotated with pre-passivate, and whenever the client again actively uses that session bin, the container will move that session bin from the passive stage to the active stage. And just before moving it from the passive stage to the active stage, it will call, sorry, not just before, right after moving the session bin from the passive stage to the active stage, the container will call or evoke the method annotated with the post activate annotation. Okay. And finally, all the lifecycle methods that have been mentioned here must return void as its return value. Okay, and it must have no parameters. Okay. Next, let's take a look at the lifecycle of stateful session bin. So the lifecycle of a stateful session bin is initiated by the client whenever the client first invokes any method on that session bin, or on that stateful session bin basically. So on this figure here, you can see that the lifecycle of a stateful session bin basically has 3 stages: the not existing stage, the ready stage, and the passive stage. So basically, the constructor, not the constructor, the container will, whenever a client actually invokes a method on a stateful session bin, the container will basically create an instance of that session bin by performing any kind of dependency injection if necessary. And if there is any method with the @PostConstruct annotation, it will execute that method as well. So after the method annotated with PostConstruct has been executed, then the bin will be ready to service its client. Now, when in this ready stage, it is possible for the container to move this session bin, that is the stateful session bin, from the ready stage, that is from the active stage, to the passive stage, because as I mentioned in the last slide, there's the possibility that the client may stop interacting with this specific session bin for a while, right? So the container will determine whether this session bin is being used or not, and if it is not currently being used, then it will be moved by the container from the primary storage to the secondary storage, okay? And this is based on some kind of algorithm that the container uses to determine which exact session bin is being used the least. So anyway, whenever a container decides that it will move a session bin from the active stage, that is from the ready stage, to the passive stage, then it will basically call any method that has been annotated with pre-passivate. And again, once a session bin is inside the passive stage, if the client again starts interacting with that session bin or that stateful session bin, then the container will basically activate that session bin again, and after that it will call the post activate or it will call the method that has been annotated with the post activate annotation. All right. And finally, for the end of the lifecycle of this session bin, it is going to be dependent on the client as well. So when the client calls the method or invokes the method that has been annotated with @remove, then basically what will happen is the session bin is going to be ready for garbage collection by the container. Okay, so that basically marks the end of the lifecycle of a stateful session bin. Now, if we take a look at the lifecycle of the stateless session bin, you will see that there are a couple of differences. So the main difference is, in this case, the stateless session bin has only 2 stages: does not exist and ready. So the creation of a stateless session bin is not dependent on the client. So yeah, that is another difference when it comes to the differences between stateless and stateful session bin lifecycles. So in case of stateful session bins, the client initiates the lifecycle of the session bin. However, in case of stateless session bin, the EJB container is responsible for the initiation of the lifecycle of the stateless session bin. So basically what happens is, whenever you actually start up your application, the EJB container will create and maintain a pool of all the stateless session bins that are present in your application, thus beginning the lifecycle of the stateless session bins. Next, after actually creating and performing any kind of dependency injection on that stateless session bin, the container will call any method inside that session bin that has the @PostConstruct annotation. Okay, after that, the session bin is basically ready for servicing. Now for ending the lifecycle of the stateless session bin, the container is responsible as well. So basically, whenever you close your application, before ending the lifecycle of the stateless session bins, the EJB container will call any method that has been annotated with the pre-destroy annotation. And finally, that session bin, that is that stateless session bin, is going to be ready for garbage collection. Now, when it comes to the lifecycle of singleton session bins, it's pretty much similar to what we have seen in case of the stateless session bins. It also has two stages, like the stateless session bin, like does not exist and ready. So, and its lifecycle is also going to be initiated by the EJB container. So the EJB container, after the application has started, will initiate the lifecycle of the singleton session bin by creating that singleton instance, okay? And this occurs upon application deployment if the singleton is annotated with the @startup annotation. Then the steps are basically similar as to what we have seen in case of stateless session bins. Basically, the container will call any method that has been annotated with @postConstruct, and then the session bin, that is the singleton session bin, is going to be ready to have its business methods invoked by a client. And as for ending the lifecycle, it is again similar to what we have seen in case of stateless session bins. The EJB container will basically call the pre-destroy, the method that has been annotated with pre-destroy annotation, and then finally the singleton session bin will be ready for garbage collection. Now, as a client, you might be wondering what are the ways one can invoke the business methods that are present inside the enterprise Java bins. Well, there are three ways. One of the ways is local client view. The other way is known as the remote view. And finally, we have another way known as the no interface view. So let's take a look at each of them and see how they work. So in case of the local client view, there is going to be an interface which contains the business methods, that is, which basically contains the definition of the business methods that can be invoked by the client. Now, since this interface contains the business methods, that is, contains the definition of this business methods, it is often called the business interface. And the client knows of the methods that have been mentioned or that have been defined inside this interface. So through this interface, the client is basically able to call on or invoke the methods invoke the business methods that are present inside your actual bin. So on your application server side, there is going to be one or more actual Java bin classes, that is enterprise Java bin classes, that implement that business interface, okay? So now you might be wondering, when exactly should you use this local client view, where you have a business interface that exposes the methods of the actual bin class to the client, right? So you should only use local client views whenever you're sure that both your client and your enterprise Java bins reside on the same server. So what does that actually mean? So you see, whenever we are considering a web client, that is a client who actually accesses the methods on our server through some web client, that is through some web browser, for example. So we know that those requests that the client makes are received by some kind of servlet, right? And servlets reside inside the servlet container. Now, enterprise Java bins, on the other hand, reside inside the EJB container, right? So we have a servlet container and we have an EJB container. Now, on the back end, for your server, you might be using some kind of server which supports both servlet container and EJB container simultaneously. In such cases, we can say that the client and the enterprise Java bins reside on the same server, right? And so, for such cases, we can use local client views. However, it might happen that to increase the scalability of your application, you might decide to host your servlet container on one server and your EJB container on another server. So basically, you're separating the location, or you're differentiating the location between the servlet container and the EJB container. In such cases, you should not use local client view. Instead, you should be using the remote view or the remote client view, okay? So basically what happens in remote client views is your servlet container will be on one server and your EJB container will be distributed in some other server. Or it might even happen that your multiple EJBs are located in multiple EJB containers across multiple servers. So basically increasing the scalability of your applications. And finally, we have the no interface view. So the no interface view is basically kind of similar to the local client view. However, the difference lies in its name, no interface. Basically, what happens is in this kinds of Java beans or enterprise Java beans, this Java beans or these EJBs do not implement any interface. They're basically standalone Java classes, that is standalone enterprise Java bean classes that implement and include some business methods that the clients can invoke. So basically, the clients directly invoke or directly call the methods that are present inside the Java bean classes, that is inside the enterprise Java bean classes, without actually taking a look at any kind of interface, because there is no interface. Okay, so all public methods of the bean classes are automatically exposed to the caller, that is, to the client. Okay, so we have seen in what ways a client can access our enterprise Java bean methods, right? But now the question arises is, how does a client get a reference to our enterprise Java beans, right? So in such cases, we have two main techniques. One of the techniques is dependency injection by using Java programming language annotations. And the other technique is JNDI lookup, or basically using the Java naming and directory interface syntax. So we already know what dependency injection is from our last lecture. So basically what happens is our EJB container will inject an object of the enterprise Java bean that is required by the calling class inside that calling class's object. Okay, so that is what happens in case of dependency injection. In case of JNDI lookup, what happens is something similar to what we have seen in case of RMI. So in our RMI lecture, we have seen that whenever we actually create a server and a client, the server registers the business methods and the business classes to some unique URI. And then the client looks up that specific URI to be able to get a proxy object or get a stub of that actual business object or business methods, and then basically use that object to call on those business methods, right? So something similar happens in case of JNDI lookup as well. Basically, the calling class, that is the client, will use JNDI lookup to get some kind of proxy object of the actual business object, that is of the actual EJB, and then use that proxy object to invoke the methods that are present inside that EJB. So what are the things that we know so far? We know that a client can view or can access the EJB through a remote view or a local view or a no interface view. And we also know that to actually get a reference or to get a reference of an instance of an enterprise Java bean, the client can take the help of either dependency injection, or he or she can take the help of JNDI lookup, right? But then you might be wondering, when should you use which technique, right? So basically, when should you use local view, and when should you use remote view? So let's take a look at a couple of other factors as well that will help in deciding whether you should be using remote view or local view. So one of the factors is tight or loose coupling of related beans. Okay, so basically in cases where you will find that one session bean is closely dependent and closely related to another session bean to perform some kind of related task, then you will understand that those two session beans should be under the same EJB container. So if I were to give an example, suppose you have a sales order session bean that basically is responsible for calculating the sales and basically executing the business method related to completing the sales of a customer, right? Now this sales order session bean is again dependent on another session bean, which basically sends a confirmation email to all the customers after a successful order has been completed. Okay, so we can say that this sales order session bean and this email sending session bean are closely related to each other and are closely dependent on each other. And so from this we can understand that these two session beans should have local access, because since one of them will be calling the other frequently, so the performance of your entire application will obviously be increased if both of them reside on the same machine, right? So basically, in this case, the sales order session bean and the email sending session bin should be in the same EJB container. That is, both of them should have local access to each other. So in such cases, we say that these two session bins are tightly coupled, and so they should be under the same EJB container, and so basically have local access to each other. Next, we have type of client. Now, so far from our discussion, we can obviously tell that there are two major kinds of clients. One type is the web client, and the other type is application client. So in case of web client, we know that web clients access our application through some kind of web browser, and the requests that they send through the web browser are received by some kind of servlet, and that servlet is responsible for calling the required EJBs to perform the required business methods. Now, in case of an application clients basically use some kind of desktop application or even a mobile application to access our actual application, right? So obviously, we can say that in such cases, these clients are completely located in a separate location from our server, right? So in such cases, it is mandatory for us to use remote access, okay? Next, we have component distribution. So we already know that one of the most powerful features of Java EE technologies is basically scalability, right? So since we can basically distribute our different components of our application onto different locations, the scalability of our application increases drastically, right? So for example, I may choose to deploy multiple EJBs under multiple EJB containers under multiple servers, right? To increase the scalability of my application. So in such cases, I should use remote access, right? And finally, another factor that we need to consider is performance. Now, obviously, we understand that distributing different components under different servers will obviously improve the performance of our application, right? So in such cases, we need remote access. However, it is also true that by increasing the number of servers, we are also relying too much on remote access, which may bring in other factors like network latency and so on, right? So if the network itself is not good enough, then the callback methods, that is the calling of methods on this remote objects, will be slow as well. So that might hit our performance as well. So as a developer, it is our responsibility to find the common middle ground where we get both performance increase as well as a good scalability for our application whenever we are developing any application, okay? So these are the things that you need to keep in mind whenever you are deciding on whether your client should have remote access or local access. All right, now let's see some of the traits or some of the characteristics of a local client. So a local client must run in the same application as the actual enterprise bean whose method it's trying to access, right? So basically, the client and the EJB must reside under the same application server. Next, it can be a web component or another enterprise bean. So basically what this means is, suppose I have one session bean that invokes the methods of another session bean, right? So in this case, I can say that the first session bean is the client, and this session bean is basically calling or invoking the methods on the second session bean, right? So in such cases, these two session beans should be present under the same server, basically under the same location. So that is another trait of local client. Also, to the local client, the location of the enterprise bean it accesses is not transparent. So basically what this means is local clients are basically aware of the actual location of the enterprise Java bean, okay? Now, if we were to create an enterprise Java bean that allows only local access, there are basically two techniques we can follow. So one of the techniques is using no interface views, right? So if you remember, no interface views are basically standalone enterprise Java bean classes whose methods are directly visible to the client. That is, the client can directly call any of the public methods that are present inside the enterprise Java bean with no interface view. Now, basically, the no interface view Java beans, enterprise Java beans, do not implement any interfaces. Okay, and again, any public method that are present inside, that are present under the no interface view enterprise Java bean can be invoked by our client. So basically, to create an EJB like this, all I have to do is basically use the @stateless or @stateful, any of the annotations that you want, and then use a public class myBnams. Basically, just create your class, write down your business methods inside that class, and so on. Okay, and any of your local clients will be able to access the methods inside this Java bean. The other technique is to basically use a business interface. So in such cases, you will have a business interface. You can name it anything you want. So whenever you actually create a business interface like this, you will have to use the @local annotation to denote that this is going to be a local EJB's interface. Okay, and then you need to have an actual bean class that implements this interface, right? So in this case as well, you will have to use the @local annotation, and you will have to specify something inside parentheses after writing @local. So what you have to specify is the name of the interface which you are implementing. So in this case, we are implementing interface name interface. So we basically wrote interface name.class, and then we will just simply follow Java syntax and write public class bin name implements interface name, and then you'll actually write down the rest of your code, which will contain the implementation of the methods that have been mentioned inside this interface. Okay. Now, when it comes to remote clients, it has some special characteristics as well. So in case of remote clients, remote client can run on a different machine and a different JVM from the enterprise bean it accesses. So basically, suppose your servlet container and your EJB container are located under two servers. So in such cases, we can say that your client and your server, that is your EJB, reside on two separate machines. Now, a remote client can be a web component, an application client, or another enterprise bean, right? So it can be a web component, as in it can be a servlet that is responsible for receiving requests from the client and forwarding it, and basically calling any other EJB that it requires. It can be an application client. Basically, it can be a client who is using some kind of desktop application or some kind of mobile application. Or it can be another enterprise bean, which is basically calling the other enterprise bean, right? Now, in case of being a remote client, the location of the enterprise bean is transparent. So basically, the remote client is not aware of the actual location of the enterprise bean, okay? Now, the enterprise bean must implement a business interface. That is, remote clients may not access an enterprise bean through a no interface view. So basically, you cannot use the no interface view access technique to use or to give access to remote clients, okay? In such cases, you will always have to use a business interface, and basically the clients, that is the remote clients, will be aware of which methods he or she can invoke through this business interface, okay? Now, if you want to create an EJB that allows remote access, here's what you have to do. You will have to create an interface with the @remote annotation, and then you will have to create a actual Java bean class, that is an actual enterprise bean class, that is going to implement this interface. And you have to mention which interface you are implementing, the same way we have done this in our previous slide for local access, right? So you will write @remote, and inside the parentheses, you will mention the actual interface that you are implementing. Okay. So now let's take a look at the naming convention for our enterprise beans. So suppose I have an enterprise bean called account. So the actual bean class of that enterprise bean is going to be named account bean, and the business interface of that account bean is simply going to be account. Okay. So pretty simple. This is a convention that you should follow because it allows for good understanding and good cleanup operations. All right, now that we know somewhat about enterprise Java beans, we can actually move into our implementation section where we actually develop an application that utilizes enterprise Java beans for its business methods. Now, the first thing that we need to do here is we actually have to download and install a server that can host both servlet container and EJB container simultaneously, right? So far, for all of our examples, we have been using Tomcat, but Tomcat can only host servlet container. So basically what we are looking for is a server that can host both servlets, that can host both a servlet container and an EJB container. Now there are many servers that support this feature. So for example, we have Glassfish, we have JBoss, and so on. The one I will be showing you on how to set up and how to use is the JBoss server. If you want, you can use some other server as well. So JBoss is currently known as Wildfly. So that is what we are going to download. Okay, so basically Google Wildfly download and head over to the first link that you find here. And here you will see that you get the option to download the latest beta version. Okay, but for now we will just stick with the stable version that we have. So the stable version right now is 21.0.2. So this is what we will download. So download this Jakarta EE full and web distribution zip file. So I have already downloaded this, so I will not be downloading it again. Now, after downloading this, you will basically get the zip file, okay? So after downloading the zip file, extract it, and you will basically get a folder. Store that folder wherever you want, but just remember the directory under which you are storing that folder, okay? We will be needing it whenever we actually move on to setting up our Intellij IDE with Wildfly server. All right, so the next thing we are going to do is we are basically going to create a new application for our project here, okay? So just simply select Java Enterprise, and under Application Server, for now, just select No Application Server, okay? I will show you how to set up JBoss or Wildfly with Intellij later on. So just select Java Enterprise here, hit Next, click Web Profile because we will be developing a web application, hit Next again, and let's name it EJB Demo Project. Okay, again, you can name it whatever you want. Hit Finish. And then you will see that Intellij promptly just creates everything for you. So you have your project structure, you have your pom.xml file, since we are using Maven as our build tool. So anyway, now let's see how we can actually set up JBoss server or Wildfly server with Intellij. So head over to Settings, then go to Build, Execution, and Deployment. And under here, under this tab, you will see we have an application server option, right? So double click here. And here you can see that we already have the Tomcat configuration that we have been using so far. So let's go ahead and add the Wildfly server that we have downloaded just now. So hit the plus sign here. And as I have mentioned, Wildfly is basically JBoss, so hit JBoss. And here you will have to locate basically locate the file that you have downloaded, right? So I have asked you to download and extract the Wildfly file that we have done in just a while ago. So I have kept my my Wildfly folder under the C drives program files. So let's see here, Wildfly 21.0.2.final. So I'll hit OK, and then you will see that Intellij automatically detects which version of JBoss or which version of Wildfly we are using. Hit OK. Then you will see some configuration happening over here. Then hit Apply. Hit OK again. And now Intellij is associated with the Wildfly server. So we have to use this Wildfly server for our project here. Okay. So let's set Add Configuration and hit the plus sign here. And here we will use JBoss server local. And then you will see that everything here is already configured because we have already added the location of our JBoss or our Wildfly server. Okay, so you can make some changes here, like you can change to whichever browser you want to use. You can change the option for on update. I will be keeping it as it is for now. And one of the interesting features here is called port offset. So by default, all the applications that you deploy under JBoss by using Intellij will be using the 8080 port number. Now suppose you want to use some other port number, like 8090, right? So what is the offset of 8090 from 8080? It's 10, right? So here I will simply write 10, and then what happens is, as you can see, the port number has automatically changed to 8090. So you can basically use this option to change the port number that you want to use. Okay, now we have a warning that says that we do not have any artifacts that have been marked for deployment. So the way you can fix this is go to the deployment tab, hit the plus sign, hit artifact, and hit use whichever of these options that you want. I always prefer war exploded, so that's what I will use. And there you go. We don't really have any other issues anymore, right? So let's see if there's anything else that needs to be changed here. Yeah, you can basically keep all of these things as they are for now. Hit apply, hit OK, and you will see now we are currently using the JBoss server, right? So let's see what we have under this project. So you can see that under the Java folder, we have a package called com.example.ejb demo project. And under this package, we have three Java files: hello application, hello resource, and hello servlet. And under web app, we have index.jsp page, which simply contains the message hello world. And at the same time, it also contains a reference or hyperlink that basically points us to the hello servlet. So basically what will happen is whenever we click on this hyperlink, we will be redirected to this hello servlet. Okay, so to test whether our application is working or not, let's run this project and see what happens. Basically, after running this project, we will be able to understand if our setup is working or not. Okay, so after your application is done compiling, you will see that your web browser that is your default web browser that you have set in that option, will open up this link, right? So we can say that it is working perfectly. So if we go back, or if we actually hit this hyperlink, we are directed to the hello servlet, and this hello servlet basically prints this hello world message, right? So let's go back to our IDE. So yeah, as you can see inside this hello servlet, we have some simple out.println lines, and these lines are printing the message hello world. Okay, so we can say that our setup with JBoss is working perfectly fine. But now what we want to do is we actually want to use enterprise Java beans to get our work done. Okay, so let's keep things very simple. The main purpose of this implementation demonstration is to show you how exactly you can configure Intellij with a server like JBoss, and then how you can actually develop enterprise Java beans and use those enterprise Java beans. So what I'll do here is I will basically be creating a new package under this already existing package that we have. So let's just name this package as beans. Okay, so we are basically be storing our interface as well as our implementations of our interface inside this beans class, or inside this beans package, sorry. So let's write a Java class. We're going to be creating an interface, and let's keep things simple and name this as welcome message. Okay, so as you can see, we are following the syntax, or not the syntax, the convention for naming our interface. So for the corresponding implementation class, that is for the corresponding actual enterprise Java bean class that is going to implement this interface, we are going to name that class as welcome message bean. So anyway, let's create this interface. And for now, suppose we want to keep things local. Okay, so yeah, we are annotating our interface with the @local annotation. Now, under the same package, we will be creating another Java class. We will name this as welcome message bean, and this class is basically going to be responsible for implementing this interface. Okay, so yeah. Now again, if you remember, we are going to have to annotate it with the local annotation. But first, let's assume we are going to keep this class, or keep this enterprise Java bean as stateless. Okay, so we'll be using the @stateless annotation, and then we will be using the @local annotation, and we are going to specify which exact class we are implementing. Okay, and then we will be writing implements welcome message. Now, one of the fun things about Intellij is inside here, you can type or you can hit Alt Insert, and then you can select override methods. Okay. Oh, right. We did not actually include any method here, right? So, okay. Suppose this interface is simply going to contain the definition of one method, which is going to return a string value. And let's just name it get welcome message. Okay. Now, heading over back to our implementation class. Now, if we hit Alt Insert, you can see that we have an option called implement methods. And here we can use that option to basically get a boilerplate code of that method that we have defined in our interface, right? So we are not going to be returning null. We are simply going to return something like, this is a message from welcome message bin. Okay. All right. So we have created our bin class, and we have created our business interface successfully. Now let's see how our client can access this, can basically get an instance of this interface and this Java bin. So heading over back to our hello servlet, this servlet is going to be responsible for that hyperlink that we have in our index page, right? So here you can see that we have a string variable called message, and the value of this message is hello world. So instead of initializing it with the value hello world, let's say that the value of this message is going to be, it's basically going to be this message that we have here. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're not going to initialize this value here, and instead we are going to initialize it inside the doGet method. Okay. So let's write message is equal to, all right, before we can actually do anything with the message variable, we at first have to inject an instance of this welcome message interface inside our hello servlet here, right? So the way we can actually inject an instance of the welcome message interface is very simple. We will be using the @inject annotation, and then we will write welcome message. There we go. So whenever the EJB container will see this annotation, it will automatically be responsible for injecting an instance of this welcome message interface inside our hello servlet class. Okay. So yeah, basically what we're going to do now is we're going to initialize the value of message as welcome message dot get welcome message. All right. Okay, cool. So this message variable is basically going to store this value here, right? So now let's redeploy our application on the server and see what we get. Okay, so our deployment has been completed. This tick mark here is a good sign that our application has been successfully compiled. Okay, so anyway, let's head over back. Let's head back to the home page. Okay, so heading back to the home page, this is what we see. Hello world, and we have the hyperlink for hello servlet. So clicking on this link, you can see that we are indeed getting the message. This is a message from welcome message bin. So we can say that our implementation of the enterprise Java bins is working perfectly fine. Okay, now let's head back again. All right, so heading back to the code, instead of using the @inject annotation, there is another annotation that we can use, which is called @EJB. Okay, @EJB. And even this annotation will work. So if we now redeploy our application over to the server again, let's see what happens. All right, so it has been successfully built. We can tell that by looking at this tick mark here. So let's just, for test purposes, let's just refresh the page again. So we get our index page. And if we hit hello servlet, we are again getting the message that we have written there. Okay, so what is the advantage of using this @EJB annotation over the @inject annotation? All right, so suppose I have multiple implementations of this business interface. Okay, so suppose I have another class. Let's name it welcome message to bin. And this class also implements welcome message. Okay. And let's just insert those methods. And instead of returning null, it's going to return this is a message from welcome message bin2. Also, we are going to have to use our proper annotations at stateless and at local. And let's just include which exact method or which exact interface we are implementing. So welcome message.class. And there. Now you can see that we have two implementations or two enterprise Java bins that implement the same business interface, that is welcome message. So heading back to our hello servlet, let's see what is happening here. So right now we have some kind of ambiguity, right? Our servlet does not really know which implementation it should actually use. So let's see what happens if we redeploy the class or redeploy the project onto our server. Okay, so right now you can see that we are getting a cross mark here that says assertion failure. So if we were to go back to our page and refresh this, you can see that we are getting an error, 404 not found. Okay, so how can we fix this error? Well, as it turns out, when we use the @EJB annotation, there are some parameters or attributes that we can set inside the parentheses. So one of the parameters is bin name. Okay, so inside this bin name, just specify the Java class which is responsible, that is the enterprise Java bin class which is responsible for implementing this specific instance. So suppose I want to use the welcome message to bin instance. Okay, and now our program should work because we are specifying which exact class we are going to be using for implementing the interface. Okay, so now if we refresh this page, sorry, not refresh, now if we redeploy our application again to the server, so yeah, now you can see that we are getting a check mark, so that means that our application should work. So okay, it's working. All right, and our message is also getting received properly. So this is how we can actually use the @EJB annotation in case we have multiple implementations of the same business interface. Okay. All right. Now we have seen how to use the @local annotation to basically give local access to our clients, right? What if we want to give remote access? So in such cases, the only thing that we have to change is this @local annotation, and we have to make it @remote. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Over to the interface as well. Okay, so all right, it should work. Let's see what happens when we redeploy this. All right, so yeah, as you can see, after redeploying it to our server, it's again still working. Okay, so basically the only change that we did is basically we changed the annotation from @local to @remote. So if we, again, for testing purposes, let's do this again. So yeah, basically everything is working just fine. Now, what if we wanted to use a no interface view? So in case of no interface view, we really wouldn't have this welcome message interface at all. We would simply have this welcome message bin class and maybe this welcome message to bin class as well. And none of these classes would be implementing anything. And inside our hello servlet, instead of injecting this interface, we would be injecting the actual bin instance. So here we would write something like this welcome message bin, welcome message bin. Okay, so this is what we would have written, and we would have directly invoked the methods from here. So you get the idea. And I've shown you how to create stateless session bins. You can follow the same technique to create stateful session bins as well. All right. So that covers our lecture and our discussion on enterprise Java beans and the implementation details on enterprise Java beans. I highly suggest that you follow this link and read chapters 32, 33, and 34. These are the chapters which actually include the content that I have covered in these two lectures, and they contain sufficient amount of information for you guys to understand enterprise Java beans in more detail. Also, chapters 33 and 34 contains a lot of examples of implementation of this different kinds of enterprise Java beans, like local access, remote access, and so on and so forth. It also has an example of no interface view, so be sure to check out these chapters, because these chapters are actually very important, and they might help you for your exam in the future. So yeah, anyway, if you have any question, let me know in the live class. I will see you guys next time. Take care.